Boa tarde a todos e todas. Meu nome é Diego, eu sou o diretor-geral da Escola Nacional da Defensoria Pública da União e hoje teremos uma sessão especial em língua inglesa com a Universidade de Wisconsin Madison, em parceria com a reunião especializada de defensores públicos oficiais do Mercosul, a REDPO. Good afternoon and very special welcome to our distinguished guest, Professor Kristopher Turner from the University of Wisconsin Madison. We are gathered here today at the forefront of a pivotal moment for the legal profession, one defined by the rapid and transformative emergence of artificial intelligence. As public defenders, our mission is anchored in justice, equity, and unwavering defense of citizens' rights. In this new era, digital, we are present with both unprecedented challenges and powerful tools that have the potential to reshape our practice, enhance our efficiency, and deepen the impact of our work. It's with this forward-looking perspective that we have convened this crucial training session. To guide us through these complexities of the subject, we are profoundly honored to welcome Professor Kristopher Turner from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Professor Turner is not only a renowned academic in the field of law and technology, but also a practical thinker who understands the real-world implication of AI for judicial systems. We are truly grateful that he has agreed to share his knowledge and his insights with us today. This training represents a significant step in our commitment to modernizing the Public Defender's Office and equipping every one of you with knowledge to navigate the future of law. I encourage you all to engage actively, ask questions, participate. Without further ado, it's my great pleasure to give the floor to Professor Kristopher Turner. Professor, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Diego, for that very kind introduction, and thank you all for having me today. I am very excited to be presenting to you on artificial intelligence and look forward to hearing all your questions. I had mentioned earlier that I don't know very much Portuguese. Bom dia and obrigado. And there, unfortunately, that's all I have, but I did want to get it out there at least to make sure that I used the extent that I could. So a little bit of background on me. My name's Chris Turner. I'm the Associate Director for Public Services at the University of Wisconsin Law School, Madison. And I teach technology and artificial intelligence in law practice. That's just wrapping up for this semester. And in the spring semester, I co-teach advanced legal research with my library director that integrates a heavy dose of artificial intelligence because that has deeply impacted how many people research and learn how to write and draft, as you all know. So in our session today, I figured we would start with something kind of fun. We'll try this together. The first thing we're going to do is try to create some images and videos. I know some of you probably used some of these image generators and video generators before, but if not, I wanted to show you how it's done. So I have up behind my PowerPoint here that I'll minimize in a second, both Microsoft's Copilot and ChatGPT's Sora. So we'll create an image that has to have a reference to Brazil, legal technology, and a non-native animal in it. And we'll do the same thing for a video as well. And then we'll try to make my voice. We'll clone my voice and see what you all think about it, see if it's worthwhile or see if it's not something that is actually going to trick anybody into thinking it's actually me speaking. So with that, let's try it out together and see how it goes. So what I have here, you should still be able to see my screen, this is called Play HT. This is a free tool that I can actually clone my voice with. So I have now I recorded 30 seconds of my voice ahead of time and I can have it say whatever I want to have say. So I'll have it say something I would never ever say, right? I'll say something like, Paula is a good friend, but not a great friend. And I'm going to generate the speech again. Remember, I would never say that, Paula. It's not true. We're good friends, of course. So I'm generating the language now and it's ready already. So let's take a listen and see what you think. Paula is a good friend, but not a great friend. What did you think? I'll play it one more time. Paula is a good friend, but not a great friend. Paula is a good friend, but not a great friend. So if you heard that on the phone, maybe you would think that is me. I think it's not perfect. It's probably due to the comma in there that's causing a little bit of the speed up. But this is a free tool that anyone could just create an account for, clone your voice for 30 seconds, or if anybody's voice for 30 seconds, and then you can have them say whatever you want to have them say. Related to that, here is Sora. So what Sora is ChatGPT's image generator and video generator. So what we're going to do is create a video of a polar bear walking through the Amazon rainforest. I'm just going to ask it to do that. Create a video of a polar bear walking through the Amazon rainforest. And so now it's doing its thing. It's added to the queue. While that is thinking, we'll come over to Microsoft's large language model that's called Copilot. This one is very interesting. So this is a University of Wisconsin subscription that we can actually use a lot of different LLMs lying underneath it, like GPT-5, but we're going to create an image, the same image, just an image of a polar bear learning about technology in the Brazilian rainforest, and we'll see what it comes up with. So while those two are working, we'll come back to our slides and we'll check on our results in a little while. It'll take maybe about 2 or 3 minutes, but in a presentation like this, we're not going to sit around and wait for 2 or 3 minutes. We're going to come back to our slides instead. So let me come back and bring my slides back up here. So that's just a little thing I like to show students, faculty, staff, the general public. I have done presentations like this for a variety of different audiences, and it's always very surprising for a lot of people to see what is actually these tools are capable of, and we will find that out in a little bit. So you can see these are some ways that lawyers are currently using AI. I've heard of all these in use by a variety of different lawyers in different practice areas and across borders everywhere. So document review and analysis is the most obvious way to use this. You can upload a lot of tools to something like Westlaw or Lexis or Notebook LM or all these other tools that are available to you and have it analyze and synthesize this information. If anyone is working in e-discovery world, there is a lot of potential and a lot of movement with AI in those platforms right now, where you can use all the AI tools to just synthesize hundreds of thousands of emails or text messages or videos to see what might be most relevant to your case. You can transcribe and take notes. I'm sure many of you have used those already. Zoom that we're using here could transcribe our meeting with the meeting that we're recording and tell you all the important points about me and about the things I'm talking about within a couple seconds. If I wanted to ask Paula to do something, one interesting thing I would say is, Paula, you missed this meeting, but Chris asked you to do this task. It's something I should normally catch and be able to assign that task to you. Just jumping through here a little bit, it can edit documents and draft documents, of course. That's something we'll try in a little bit. Idea generation is one of my favorite ways to use Gen AI. Something that I will sometimes use as an example is to write an email to an underperforming staff member. Imagine you have someone that is not doing their job, but you want to approach in a way that is not too harsh, not too mean to them. And maybe AI could help you draft that and come up with a plan to help them get up to the right level of performance. And I have used it for similar things for drafting emails often. Research is one thing, again, we'll try it there. That's in a very important way. It's changing how all students and lawyers are doing work for research, because it is another effective tool that also has a lot of pitfalls in it. And then, as we just saw, image, voice analysis, creation, and duplication. And then we were just talking before we started the recording about how this could affect elections. And you can see just a free tool that I did within 30 seconds has something that might pass as me if you just heard it on a phone or just heard it on a commercial or something like that, or on social media. And this last bullet point at the very bottom is a note that I added recently. In August of 2025, there was a survey of American law firms that shows that profits are way up, 13.7% increase in profits, most likely due to Gen AI integration. You can see that they're also spending more, 10% growth in expenses. And I would say that's probably also Gen AI that is causing that growth in expenses, because these are very expensive tools that can lead to more efficiencies, but also cost you money on the front ends. So here's a quote that I like to often share with people here is like, I get a lot of students that get very worried about AI taking their jobs. And as we'll see in this presentation, as you've probably seen in your own use of AI, is that it is not there yet. It is not ready to take someone's job unless they want to be a bad lawyer. That's the only way it's going to take their jobs here. So it's not a question of if, but how it will reshape the profession. You have to shift to it. The students that I talk to about AI, I tell them that the only lawyers that are getting replaced are the ones that refuse to adapt. The ones that say, that is not for me. I am not even trying it. It's not something I think is worthwhile. I've happily done it my own way for years, or I just don't want to try it. Those are the lawyers that are most at risk of getting phased out. The ones that are staying on top of this and staying tech conscious are the ones that will stay relevant and continue to get the important jobs and work much more effectively. That's from someone that's in Wisconsin there. So when using AI, we always want people to stop first. This is so simple to just start using this. I run into the same thing with people doing research. Again, I'm a librarian. When I see people doing research, they just jump right in and use a Google search and hope for the best. There are much better ways to do this, and it's similar with Gen AI tools. You have to stop. And before you even start typing in any prompt, you have to think about what AI policies might exist out there. Is there a policy for where you work? Do they say you can use ChatGPT, but not Claude? You can use Copilot for this tool, for this purpose, but not for this purpose. And there are also sometimes court rules and regulations that say you cannot use AI at all. Or you can use AI, but only if you completely disclose everything that you've used it for. We'll talk about that more with the ethical guidance later on in this presentation about how transparency and communication is extremely important when it comes to working with AI tools. And then thing that I am really, really hoping everyone is already doing is looking at the terms of service and privacy settings for these tools. It is very simple to just sign up for free accounts. One thing I always say is that nothing is free. If you're not paying with money, you're paying with information. If you are just having a free account for something, everything you put into it is being used to train that large language model in some way. So if you put in confidential information and it's a free account, or it's definitely something that your law firm has not approved, then it is most likely leaking out there and you're likely in violation of some sort of confidentiality rule of professional ethics. So anything that's uploaded, we always tell our students, if you're uploading it, consider it like you putting it in a public filing, because it could get out there that way. People would have to maybe query and prompt the tool the right way to get that information, but it would be possible to do that. So the last step here, as we go through kind of the initial things to think about before we begin to use Gen AI, is whether it is actually the best tool. I have a phrase I learned from a library scientist professor called chasing the shiny, where it is the new hot thing that everyone loves and everyone wants to use. And do you chase that shiny, or do you use something that is actually going to save you time? Is the AI tool the right tool for your task? That's another thing I want people to consider when they are using AI. Just because it's there doesn't mean you should use it every time. There's a new term I just learned over the weekend called LLM lemmings. It's the animal lemmings, that follow each other off the cliff. It's called LLM lemmings, where they are just so stuck on using AI tools that they will follow it off a cliff if they need to. And that's what we want to avoid with legal work or non-legal work. If you're just using it in your personal lives, do not just fall back on AI tools for that. And then remember, every time you're using AI, the risks and the benefits, you are ceding agency and you're ceding some expertise, because you as lawyers are the experts. The AI is trained on legal documents, but it does not have your expertise or your education on the same level. However, what you get back in return is efficiency and sometimes synthesis. It will help you begin to understand information more quickly, to kind of get your head around a new difficult concept, to understand why this was put this way, or even to compare arguments between two different briefs, maybe opposing sides. You just want to quickly understand what they're both saying. But again, when you do that, you are giving that control over to the AI and you're losing your own agency. So to find that balance is extremely important. And then we do not want to cut corners. We want to work smarter. I always tell the students I'm working with that we don't want shortcuts. We want efficiency. Shortcuts lead to all the news stories that we see about people using AI poorly. And instead, we want people to work efficiently so they can get that rise in profits, or just clearing out the backlog of cases in a fast way. So there are plenty of risks. This is where I always like to stop and just relax for a minute and let people think about the risks risk that they entail if they use AI incorrectly. There is so much vast potential with AI, but then people get so excited about it, they don't consider some of these risks as they're using it. So as we've started to already discuss a little bit, the dependence on the training data is something that we have to know about. If your LLM, large language model, which is a ChatGPT or a Claude, is trained on particular types of information, some of your questions will not be answered correctly. So ChatGPT is trained on mostly the entire internet that's freely available and open out there. And as we know, the internet never lies, right? Wait, that's not true. But there's also copyrighted material in there. There's opinions in there. There's blogs. There's things that are not legal dependent. And that is what ChatGPT is using to craft your drafting. And because of that, you have to be aware of where it is coming from. And you can ask it for cites sometimes, and it can provide that occasionally, not always, but you sometimes have to query it and get there. And then as we talked about already, there's the privacy and confidentiality issues. If you are putting anything in there, especially if it's a free tool, it is basically out there in the public, and anyone can find that if they're asking correct questions. So again, if you're putting information in there, try to keep it as neutral as possible if it's a free tool. And even if it is not a free tool, think about what you would want to put in there, because it is still potentially retaining those questions and those prompts for training or for just troubleshooting later on. And then the overzealousness and the hallucinations. So if you're not aware of what hallucinations are, that is when an AI tool just comes up with outright wrong information, where a case that it comes up with doesn't exist, or a quote from a case doesn't exist. And it says, here is the thing that we want to, the source we found that supports your argument. I think one of the reasons from all my readings and understandings of this is the reason it hallucinates in part is it's trying to please you. That is how these tools are trained. They are meant to try to answer your questions. They want to make you happier with your interactions with them. And so if there isn't a true answer, they might lean on, well, we have to just find something and really answer this question. That's not the only reason these things happen, but that could be one of the reasons that it's happening. And you can see I have a couple examples of things that have happened to lawyers that were sanctioned for you relying on fake information. One of them had to write a letter to their law school dean saying why they used bad citations and bad case law in their brief. And another judge in the States said, you are responsible not only for your own briefs, but if opposing counsel uses a fake site and you don't catch it, you might be sanctioned. So that is an added layer of stress for all parties concerned that someone is using the right information the whole time. We've talked about these ill-advised shortcuts. We don't want people just going quickly to go for the sake of going quickly. You have to be efficient, not take the shortcuts. And then there's larger concerns where if we had another 3 hours, we could talk about these in the detail that they deserve, such as access to justice. A lot of these large language models are being used by litigants who are representing themselves. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes it is misleading and not helpful. It depends on the training that those litigants have gotten. The environmental impact is something that is very concerning for a lot of people. These data centers that large language models use take a lot of water to cool down those servers. They take a lot of energy to create the answers to our prompts, and they are often put in places where people do not want these data centers placed. And then there's, of course, the cost. These are expensive tools, and a lot of the companies are still losing money. So there's the AI bubble that is being discussed constantly about when this might pop, if ever. And then the job loss, which, as I mentioned, some students are concerned that as this is fully integrated, that there'll be fewer jobs for them coming out of law school. Now, I don't know. There are some instances where job loss has happened, but there's other instances where jobs have been retained or even added that to work with AI tools more deeply. So that's the jury is still out on that one. So a few things about AI courts in the news here. I just ripped these from the headlines. The first one here is from Brazil. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir. I think you all know about this one already, that many Brazilian courts have adopted AI to help clear the backlog of all the cases that are stacking up in the various Brazilian courts. I believe there was 140 different AI projects that are being used right now to help clear that backlog. Of course, as that backlog is cleared, many people are also using AI to file more cases. So it's kind of a vicious circle that keeps on building up, where AI is helping litigants file cases more quickly and maybe legitimately, maybe not. So AI is being used both to clear that backlog. I was just reading this article earlier this morning about how the backlog of Brazilian cases, according to that article, is at the lowest point since 1992. So that's kind of encouraging. But also, I think that that could come back up as more people use AI to file their own cases more quickly. In the states, at the federal level, so in the US Senate, they just had a hearing for 2 federal judges who admitted they were using AI, or their clerks were using AI, and they had relied on false cases. They relied on those hallucinations to make their rulings. This took a long time for these judges to admit that they had used them and not checked them correctly. It's always, here's what I've learned when these kind of headlines come out, it's always the intern's fault. It's always the law student's fault. However, where does the responsibility lie? With the judge. And so it's truly on the judge's table to make sure that this does not happen. This is at the state court level in Georgia, the Georgia state case trial level. They decided their case based on AI hallucinated case law. This was a divorce case, and they said that side wins because of the case you cited here. Unfortunately, the case that they decided it on was not real. This is a real legitimate problem, very concerning to me, because I think it undercuts the trust of the public should have in the judicial system to say, well, they didn't even rely on real law. They just didn't even read. They seemingly didn't care whether this was real or not. And so this is becoming more prevalent. That Georgia case happened first, and then later the federal judges above it used AI to help them make their decisions. They didn't rule based on an AI hallucinated case, but they still used it and were influenced by AI. And then lastly, this is in California. A trial judge, the lowest level, state level in California, says the plaintiff used AI-generated fake evidence, so deep fakes, to try to persuade them. So it was video and a couple other images that they had doctored using AI to enhance their case. I'll share these. I think Paula already shared these slides with you. These should all be linked out to these articles that I am just clipping the headlines from. So if you'd like to read more about it, please feel free to. But this is another situation where people are now trying to game the system or work it to their advantage with AI to say, I'm just going to tweak this a little bit and try and trick the court with fake evidence. So the rules of evidence is something else I think is going to be deeply, deeply affected by this, either now or later. I'd say now. And by the way, here are some ways you can track Gen AI hallucinations. This one has at least 6 Brazilian cases that are known where a fake case was cited and there were sanctions imposed on the lawyer. There's up to, I think, over 500 cases here. They're mostly US decisions, but it's all international as well. It's fascinating to just kind of walk through there and see what happens. For example, here's one from Wisconsin that just happened just over 2 months ago, where a lawyer relied on Westlaw to create a brief, and Westlaw hallucinated a case, and it gave a bad quote from the fake case, and they were sanctioned $4,500 US dollars. So that's just one example of what it looks like. And you can go in and read the decision from the judge about what they did to sanction them. It's a really interesting database to go over. And there are other ones too that you can find. So just Gen AI Legal Hallucinations Tracker, international decisions on the last one there. A lot of different ways to really slow down and realize that this is happening all over the place, and that this is, in my opinion, probably just a drop in the bucket for how many times people are using bad case law in their briefings. So here are a few ways that you can start to spot AI hallucinated text. Now, the amusing thing to me about this list, this is something that me and my library director have put together, is that you're looking for hallucinations, which is documents that don't exist. It sounds good, but it lacks any authority behind it. It's repetitive, it's inconsistent, it's overly formal. You know, that could be AI, or it could be a bad lawyer. That is where it becomes very difficult. Is this just a bad lawyer? Or is it AI? Or perhaps it's someone representing themselves that doesn't know any better and that they're just writing it this way and this is how it came out. It can be very difficult to disentangle the times when AI is the bad actor here, or if it's a lawyer that just isn't taking the time to do their work properly. And there is no really true way to actually catch all this information, to catch a hallucinated case or catch AI generated information. So that is what is one of the most frustrating things. You might see out there that there is a tool that we catch when AI is used, or we can always see a AI generated image or text. They can never catch all of them because it's changing so rapidly. That is just the vendor trying to say, this is something we can do. Purchase a subscription. So here are just some basic tips that you can use. There's no perfect solution, like I said, but it is doable, but also not perfect. So briefly, I want to go a little bit through some of the ethics rules I have added in here. I usually talk about the ABA, the American Bar Association formal rule. So they issued a rule in 2024, summer of 2024, on Gen AI. And then it also affects the ABA's model rules of professional conduct, where the states adopt all the model rules for their states and say, here's what you have to follow if you're practicing in this jurisdiction. But then there's the OAB that issued the recommendations on Gen AI use in November of 2024. So shortly after the ABA issued their formal rule. And it's really a pretty solid, there are a lot of equivalents between the ABA rule, the model rules, and then the OAB's recommendations as well. And again, I think I'm going to be preaching to the choir on OAB, but I want to show how these things all kind of go together with competence and how they work with AI. So starting with competence, this is the ABA, American Bar Association's 1.1. So very first rule, attorneys must provide competent representation to a client. Now that sounds like it makes sense to me. I think that's something you should have to do. But when you do that, one of the comments to the ABA rule for comment 8 is to maintain requisite knowledge and skill to provide competent representation. You have to stay abreast of changes, including the benefits and risk associated with relevant technology. Now, Gen AI is probably one of the most relevant technologies in the past 20 years, if not longer than that, since the advent of the internet and email and electronic communication. And you can see that the OAB in section 3.1 of their recommendation has a very similar setup here to the competency requirement for Gen AI tools. So what this boils down to is you have to know what Gen AI is and how it works so you can issue spot and find those problems and find where it can be most effective to support you and become more efficient. So there's also hand in hand with competence is confidentiality. The ABA confronts this again with Rule 1.6. A lawyer shall not reveal information relating to the representation of a client unless the client gives informed consent. Informed consent is the key clause here because, again, with the OAB recommendation, they talk a lot about confidentiality in Section 2. I'll leave this one up here for a few minutes just as we talk through this a little bit more. But you can see here, when you are using AI, you have to disclose it to your clients. And you have to maybe explain how you are using it and why you're using it that way. And if they don't want you to use it, if the client doesn't want you to, you have to find alternative routes to getting your job done. There's a lot of surveys that are out there of American lawyers that show that clients are mostly good with using AI as long as you are transparent about its use. And they have to understand why. So again, this falls right in line with what the OAB is saying here is that if you are telling them how and why you're using this, you are falling in line with the recommendations for Gen AI. If you hide this under a rock or you don't tell anyone about it, that's kind of a sign that you feel like you're doing a bad act or you're doing something that's against the rules, or you're more likely to break a rule. So to be forthright about how you're using AI and how you are not going to be breaking confidentiality rules is extremely important here. And then along those same lines as confidentiality and competence, you have communication, the ABA rule 1.4. So you have to consult with the client about the means by which their objectives are going to be accomplished. So that is already something we saw from the OAB. And the lawyer shall explain the matter to the extent reasonably necessary to permit the client to make informed decisions. So once again, we are seeing a lot of parallels between the ABA rules about competence and just model conduct and the OAB recommendations specifically for Gen AI with this. So here's communication for Section 4. Again, just transparency, talking about how and why you're going to use AI on their case. The next section for the ABA that they talk about here is candor to the tribunal. So this is an area that this seems like it's fundamentally obvious to lawyers, but apparently not, is what I have learned. A lawyer shall not knowingly make a false state of fact or law or fail to correct the same, or offer evidence they know to be false. Okay, so we shouldn't put before the tribunal stuff that we know is incorrect or something that is gonna be a failure on the law's part. Well, here you can see that the ABA formal ethics opinions output from a generative AI tool must be carefully reviewed to ensure that the assertions made to the court are not false. And right there, the OAB recommendation, one of the first considerations is remember that Gen AI tools can create false information and errors. So again, I was really happy to see that the ABA and the OAB are really aligning on this and saying that this is something you have to pay careful attention to when you're using these tools. A few examples, one good, one bad, of using Gen AI in law practice. I'll show you one of these. Is on the left-hand side where you can see the tribunal of judges and the little inserts in the lower parts of the video. This person was appearing before a tribunal of judges in New York. He was very nervous about making his case. He was a pro se litigant, so representing himself. So he made an AI avatar to make his case for him, his closing arguments. And that's who you see in the lower right-hand side. He did not tell the judges that this AI tool was going to make this presentation for him. And if you watch the video, that's actually a recording of the streaming of the video of the hearing itself. You'll see that the judge does not like it. That is something that they do not approve of, and it only lasts seconds before they make him stand up and do it anyway, because he was not transparent, did not share this with the judges ahead of time. On the right-hand side, you can see that we have an AI-generated image. This was a victim impact statement. So the gentleman you see there was killed in a road rage accident in Arizona. His family worked with a IT department to make an AI-generated image of him asking for leniency for the person that killed him. And the judge admitted that as evidence to try and show why that the person that killed him should not receive the harshest punishment as possible. So I'm going to jump back out here really quick and we'll watch just a couple seconds of this victim impact statement. First of all, there's our image of the polar bear in the Brazilian rainforest using technology. I think that looks pretty nice, pretty cute. And let's see if we have our video yet here. Yep, there we go. So here's our videos from Sora. I'll hold still for a second there. So it's just a little like 10-second video of the polar bear wandering through the Brazilian rainforest. Doesn't look too bad. One thing you can do with Sora is you can remix it. So if I wanted to choose this video, I could actually have a conversation and make changes with this video, maybe make it longer, add more animals in the background, whatever it might be. So there's our video that we made just a little while ago. Up here is our AI victim impact statement. Let's give it a listen.
Hello. Just to be clear for everyone seeing this, I am a version of Chris Pelkey recreated through AI that uses my picture and my voice profile. I was able to be digitally regenerated to share with you today. But here is insight into who I actually was in real life. Take a look.
All right. And then they intersperse that with recordings, real recordings of him before he passed away. But that's an idea of something that actually made it into court and did actually change how the person was sentenced. So I think that's a really interesting way of people currently using AI in sentencing. So let's just a few ways about candor to the tribunal. One, there was no candor, there was no transparency. Another one, there was very much transparency, and they worked very closely with the IT people to make sure that it looked okay, and with the judge to make sure it was acceptable. So after we have considered all the ethics, after we have looked at all the pros and the cons and the efficiencies, we actually know how to use these tools correctly. And so my library director and I have come up with these 7 P's of prompt engineering. So what we mean by prompt engineering is when you're actually discussing your prompt with the AI tool, this is how you think about it first. Again, as I said at the very beginning, it's very simple to just quickly jump in and start using these tools. But if you do that, you're not going to get the best output. Instead, if you take 10 minutes, if not even that, and think about all these P's first, this will give you a much stronger output that you can then work off of. So to walk through these P's, first of all is persona. So you want to set a perspective, a tone, give the AI an idea of where it's coming from, the expertise level you want. So my example here, act as an experienced employment attorney in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So now immediately the AI knows, okay, I have to come at this from a lawyer perspective based on its training data. It's not coming at it from science. It's not coming at it from humanities or history. It's coming at it from law school perspective. Product is something I often see missed when people are putting in a prompt to try and get information out of their AI tool. Tell it what you want. I have a lot of people just say, draft something or create whatever. Tell it what you want exactly. A 2-page client memo, an analysis of pros and cons, a table comparing these points of law in these 2 briefs, an image, a video, whatever it is. Tell it what you want as the final outcome. And then the last one, as you're setting the stage, is the prompt. This is just an action word. So for example, analyze, compare, create, draft. These kind of go well with the product. Create a 2-page client memo. The more specific you can be with a evocative action word, the better outcome there will be. One I had with a student one time was imagine. I thought imagine was an interesting way to prompt the tool. I think you're giving it a wide range of options for it to prompt and to bring back information. I would probably rein that in a little bit to something like summarize or identify or evaluate as opposed to imagine. But if you want to start with a very general idea, maybe imagine would be the way to go. Next, you want to have the purpose or the objective. Explain the why behind your request. Like, here is why you want to do it. This is the other one I don't see very often. Why are we asking for this? Here's why. My client has I want to see if my client has a viable discrimination claim, and I need to understand the elements. So after you've done everything else, you are actually going to start to add that context, first of all, with the purpose for why you're asking. And then you want to prime it with information and context and nuance about your specific situation. So this is my example here involves Wisconsin employment law. We're in federal court. The defendant filed this motion. You're filling in information so the AI can give you the most expansive answer back. So after you have set the stage, you're adding the context along the way. And then finally, you have to remember to keep that privacy in mind. Never include any client's names. I don't think there's ever a reason to put a client's name in there. That's something you can easily insert there later on, or any other identifiable information, confidential details, work product. That stuff does not need to be put into the prompt, into the AI to get a great output from it. So you can see a 45-year-old employee was terminated versus my client, John Smith, was fired from ABC Corp. There's a huge difference there, and it does not add anything necessarily to it. I could see where you might think, well, it would add in all that information for me, but then also remember that the privacy comes into play there. You have to consider what level of license you've purchased for the tool, whether it's shared, whether it's training on it. And so that goes back to one of our earlier slides about understanding those terms and agreements that you have with the AI tool you are using. These are all opening up opportunities for more data to leak out in cybersecurity. It's not the purpose of this presentation, but AI is another tool that can be really used to knock down all your cybersecurity defenses. And as you put information out there, that information can then be turned against you to try to crack into your confidential information in your own databases. And so we'll just do this really quickly. This is an example of a prompt in action. So here's a hypothetical that we often give our students, where we represent Jackson Turner, an inmate serving 30 years for aggravated assault in a federal penitentiary. Then you have some details there about what he claims happened, that he was beaten by some police officers. And then we see what the damages he is seeking in the last paragraph there. Damages potentially available, relief that can stop this from happening again. We took on Turner as a client, so we're a lawyer that's taking them on. And we want to see if we can create a complaint that alleges the actions that Turner describes above. Normally, if we had another, again, like I said, another hour and a half, we would walk around and try to create a good prompt using our 7 Ps to come up with a good response to put into one of our large language models that I have listed on the left-hand side. So at UW-Madison, we actually have access to these 4: Google Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, Lexis Plus AI, which they call Protege, and Westlaw CoCounsel. I have Lexis Protege up, but I first want to show you a few examples of some of the prompts that could be used here. So I have them kind of in rainbow hues. So here's the first one that you could probably come up with just off the top of your head. Draft a complaint about excessive force by prison guards. Now that is an acceptable prompt, but you're not going to get back quite enough information. You have to do a lot of work on the output there to actually get what you want there. So you can see we have our prompt, we have a product, and we have a little bit of priming, some context and nuance there. So we added a little bit more on the next one. As the representative for an inmate, draft a complaint alleging the use of excessive force. So again, we've added the persona here as the main addition, where now the large language model knows that we are representing an inmate here. I think we can do a little better though. So now we are representing an inmate at a correctional facility in Indiana, drafting, and then we added even more information like the jurisdiction, I have seen many students miss the jurisdiction, and then they will try to file a brief that's in a different state. That's not going to work. You want to make sure you're relying on the primary law in the state that you are working in. So getting that in there for the product or for the priming is extremely important. So you can see we've actually added a lot more information to where we're up to 2 paragraphs here. Most of it is just context and priming, where now we have a lot more information about the officer that has been about what happened with the officers. But we can also go a little bit further because we still don't have a purpose. So here is our purpose. Here's what the client is seeking from us for their goal for filing this information, filing this lawsuit. So here is the final prompt that we came up with. I will say right now that there is no perfect way of getting the exact prompt out there to get the most excellent response. You could have what you consider the best prompt in the world and still get a terrible response. This is the mystery of using these AI tools, because you can put the exact same prompt in to 2 different ones like Westlaw and Lexis and get extremely different answers. They might come to the same conclusion, but they will get there via different avenues and roads. So I'll jump out one more time. I'll go out of here and we'll come into Lexis. So Lexis rolled out their AI tool Protege pretty early on. And you can see that in my version, I have Protege on the left-hand side over here. And so I can just enter, this probably looks like many of the AI tools you've used in the past, where you can ask, you can draft something, you can summarize a case, or you can upload documents and ask it to synthesize it. So I'll just paste in our prompt there. And it'll generate its response. It'll take probably just a couple minutes here. You see, I didn't really put much in there. I just asked it to just go ahead and roll with it. And so it's analyzing the prompt. We're not going to sit here and wait for it here either. While it is waiting, I want to show you the other tool that we mentioned towards the beginning called Notebook LM. Notebook LM is a Google product where it is mainly a tool you can upload documents to. So over here, you can add up to 50 sources to your own unique AI agent that you create. So all that this agent knows are these sources that you select for it. So right now, the only source I have for this bot is the ABA ethics opinion on generative AI that we talked about earlier with the ethics. So now you could ask it any questions about these model rules. So I just had a sample one. What model rule governs a lawyer's required professional conduct when deploying Gen AI tools? And it's reading through all the sources I gave it. And it has the answers here. One of my favorite things it does is it cites its sources. What a relief. If I click on 5, it takes me down to the actual source that it got, where it got that information from. So I can go and read this and check it myself. Again, as a librarian, I love checking sources. I need to know where you're getting your information from. And I like that this tool, along with some other ones, actually do that for us now. You can also, on the right-hand side here, create some other ways to kind of play with the information you've uploaded. You can create a report. You can create flashcards. A lot of my students use Notebook LM to create quizzes for themselves as they're studying. They upload their outlines to this and other notes. And sometimes they upload the actual recordings of the lectures and let the AI listen to it. Not sure how I feel about that, but I see what they're doing. You can also create a basically audio podcast right here, the audio overview. So here is one example of it. I'll just play you what it sounds like here.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something that's, well, moving incredibly fast. Generative AI, or GAI. It promises amazing efficiency, but for professionals, especially lawyers, it throws up some huge ethical red flags.
That's exactly right. It's this real time.
And of course, that is all Gen AI. Those are all Gen AI voices. If you ask it to create an audio overview, it takes about 5 minutes to create about a 13 to 20 minute podcast for you, where you can just listen to something that's synthesizing and condensing all your sources into one little podcast. So you can see they've added more and more stuff, like, for example, a slide deck. This is brand new. I actually haven't seen it yet. And these infographics is a new one where you can create an infographic based on your sources. Coming back to Lexis AI, let's see how they're doing here. So you see they've drafted a complaint for us, USCS 1983. That is the right statute that I would file this under. And you can go in here and check the rest of the jurisdiction and venues, the factual allegations. So we have the skeleton of a complaint here. Failure to intervene, injunctive relief, relief requested, legal basis, and supporting authority. So here's the case law that it relied on to create it. And further down, we have other content that supports the AI generated response. So if I wanted to go read this, if I clicked on any of these, it would take me to what the actual content is within Lexis. So it did a very good job starting me out there. So I can see there's 32 other cases it would like me to look at, 13 statutes, and then some treatises as well. So if I had no idea where to start with a situation like this, I could see starting here and seeing how it goes. So that's just an example of how I could use AI to get started on drafting a prompt. And I think it's a good starting point. By the way, you might have noticed I only did 6 Ps. Here is the 7th P. This is polish. You want to keep on refining this. So as you get that response from the AI tool, that is not the final step. You have to continue to work with it and make sure that it's getting what you want out of it. You got to check for that accuracy to make sure it's not citing hallucinated cases. Even the best of them, like Lexis and Westlaw, that are trained exclusively on legal content, can hallucinate. I have seen it happen with students and with myself. And then you can just ask it for further information. Like it gave me that complaint. Now I can say, what case law specifically supports this aspect of your assertions? Or what are the weaknesses in this complaint? Ask it to be critical. Otherwise, they will not be critical. They all want to be very nice and not be critical of their own work or your work. Make them be critical. Speaking of, here are just a few more ways you can make your prompts all the stronger. Beware how it will try to please you, like I just said. They want to make you happy. And I don't want to be made happy by an AI tool. I want to make the best outcome that I can for my clients. So make it be critical. What are the weaknesses in this claim, like we just said? And also, like I just said, but I can't say it enough, tell people to always check those sources. Do not be the main character in AI world that didn't check those sources. And then you have the problem of showing up in the newspaper or on those AI sources, AI trackers that are saying, here's someone that got sanctioned. A few more prompting tips. Avoid drift. Don't have long conversations with Gen AI tools. I'd say I have the sweet spot being between 10 and 20. I would actually say lower that down to maybe 5 to 10, because Gen AI tools tend to forget the initial prompt, especially if you had a really well-crafted initial prompt. It'll forget what it's talking about and maybe not give you accurate information. So once you get up to 10 at the very most, refinements, take what you've got and start over if you need to, or you take over from there. And then you watch out for the pink elephants, where if you say, don't think about pink elephants, the first thing you do is think about pink elephants. So don't cite other states, say, focus only on Wisconsin cases. So tell what to focus on, not what to avoid. Those are some tips that we have seen work pretty successfully. And then as we head for home here in our presentation, here's just a few ways you can generate tools and draft with Gen AI. So Lexis, we saw, do a little bit of drafting for us. Westlaw does similar stuff where you can query the documents, create timelines and interrogatories where you're going to ask witnesses information. You can draft relatively stable legal memos. Some of them are good, some of them are weak. Sometimes it depends on the prompt. In fact, I'd say the prompt is probably the most important starting point for it. And we saw Notebook LM already, where you can query those documents, summarize, create a lot of cool things, draft reports. Really helpful tool for really wrapping your mind around something that you have a known universe of data for. Again, a lot of my students love that one because Notebook LM is better trained for understanding language, meaning that it's more conversational. It's easier to read for law students. Lexis and Westlaw is more legal centric, and so they might not understand all the legal reasoning and language that is used there. But Notebook LM, despite not having legal training as well as Lexis and Protégé, does make it more understandable for someone that doesn't understand a difficult concept. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind with Notebook LM, is it can just be something that can be translated more easily to someone else. And so this one we did already. This is Notebook LM, where we uploaded the ABA Ethics Opinion 512. This audio overview podcast, it's available to you through your slides. You can go and listen to it and see what you think of it. Or this Notebook LM will take you to the one we just looked at if you'd like to interact with it or see what it can do. So one thing I always like to end with here is the Gartner hype cycle for technology, because this is a very consistent way that when new technology is released, what happens to it and what happens with the expectations for it. So ChatGPT came out in November of 2022, only 3 years ago, believe it or not, is when ChatGPT was released. So that was the innovation trigger. And suddenly, you probably remember it well, everyone had this large peak of inflated expectations. This thing can pass all the bars. Lawyers are not going to be needed anymore. Law schools are irrelevant. You can't teach essays any longer. What are we going to do? Like, this is all wiping out white collar work. Suddenly, crash down into the trough of disillusionment. This thing hallucinates, it's racist, it's biased, it's stereotyping, it does not produce quality output. And then slowly but surely, we work our way up that slope of enlightenment to where we have the plateau of productivity. We're like, okay, here is the proper use of these tools, keeping in mind its weaknesses, but also its strengths. And we are working towards that plateau right now. However, the problem with Gen AI tools is it keeps on advancing. Those advanced video creations we saw with Sora, the ChatGPT, was not available in 2022. It wasn't as good in 2022. And there's more advanced tools coming out as we speak. That's one thing about always talking about Gen AI presentations is this could be different as we are speaking right now. But here are some of my guesses and thoughts about where we're going next. So it's going to be integrated into everyday office tools and legal tools. You probably already have seen it in Microsoft Office with Copilot. Google, of course, if you do a Google search now, it has an AI mode at the top where it tries to answer your question for you. That's useful sometimes, not so useful other times, I'll put it nicely. But this is where you're going to see it. It's going to be harder to avoid. And if you don't want to use it, you're going to have to probably go out of your way a little bit. Something called retrieval augmented generation is going to be more prevalent, would be my guess. But that is where the AI tool has been trained on just the work you have given it. So Notebook LM is a great example where you have those 50 sources and say, here's everything you know. That's all you can use. And you go from there. You can also do that with just your work product where you have an AI tool that just sits on top of your work product. And then agentic AI is the next step where these tools are going to make the choices for you. Just say what your end goal is, and then it goes from there. And a great example of that is the self-driving cars that are currently available in San Francisco. This is one that I had the fortune to drive in January. So you can see I am sitting in a car with no driver, driving around San Francisco, California at 7:30 in the morning. It cost me $20 for a 30-minute ride, and it had no problems navigating through a relatively busy city. All I had to do was tell it where to go, and it handled all the rest of the directions. And you can draw the parallels there to where we go next, is you just say, I want this client to get out of jail, and here's how, and then it will start to maybe make the calendar appointments, start to draft emails for you. It'll start to make all the schedules that you need to actually reach that goal. So as we wrap up here, we have some advice for law students and faculty. This is an extremely powerful tool. I know you already know that, but it's worth reemphasizing. And it's changing rapidly. You have to stay on top of this. This is something that's not going to just be there for 2 years, let alone 5 years. This is changing every month at the least. And so we want people to ask questions and think critically. We were talking about that at the beginning about information literacy and just diagnosing where this information comes from. You cannot just assume something is true now. There's just too many ways that people can game the system or create deep fakes using Gen AI. It's available and it's cheap enough where people can do it, or they might be desperate enough to do it. And we want to engage with the community, which we're doing right now, just to talk about this, see what we can do, what's the best way to approach this, and then just seek out opportunities to explore. Look for fun things to try out. Try a case that you know that maybe you've written a brief on. Try it in one of the tools and see how it does. See what cases it misses. See if it's similar to what you did. See how it can make you more efficient. And then just reach out with questions. And that's where you can always ask me questions or anyone else questions about this. So thank you all for taking the time to join me today. I'm happy to answer any questions now or down the line.
Thank you, Professor Kristopher, for this brilliant presentation. I think we have some questions for the audience. I will ask to Dr. Luciana to ask them.
Great. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. It was super insightful. And I'm still waiting for I don't see any questions here on the chat, but I asked them to send me through WhatsApp if there are any questions that were sent to the Public Defender's Office. But while that, I have some questions that I would love to pose to you. The first one is, you mentioned a little bit about agentic AI, but I would love to hear a little bit more on, do you have any concrete examples of the use of agentic AI in the legal profession, and if you have any critical reflections on that? And a second question would be, what do you think is the value added of creating a bot that could help us. For example, I create a bot for my office at the public defender's office, and I put all the safeguards on it of not sharing information, and then I create a bot through an LLM. Do you think there is a value added on that? Do you have any thoughts to share on that? Thank you very much.
Sure, of course. Yeah, the best example I can see for both agentic AI use and creating a bot is something called Harvey AI. I don't know if anyone has heard of that one. Harvey AI is a tool that was created in partnership with ChatGPT and OpenAI really early on, specifically for law firms. And it's basically what you were just describing, a bot that sits on top of your own work product. And you say it's trained on just your work product. So it has your normal voice in the documents. So you're like, okay, here's how I would normally write a complaint or a brief or a memo. But here's the situation here. Go and find if we have written anything similar like this and draft one for me. And so you just give it a little bit of information and it starts to pull from all your different tools and resources and history and create something for you. That's the one that I have seen. But again, agentic AI is something that people will rely on too much, at least initially, in my opinion, because you still need to make sure it has that distinctive voice, because when it doesn't have an example for you, it will fill in with its best guess or best estimate. And that, I think, is where it really becomes most obvious, going back to how to spot AI text, is that it looks too formal or it doesn't come off in the human voice. So that there is a lot of pros to creating your own bots. I have seen firms here. We actually had a presentation with one group that they had created their own bot that sits on top of all their work product. They basically got a GPT from OpenAI and just trained it on their own information. And they said it really has enhanced their work, both with just learning about what is happening with their HR department, but also with their IT department, with the legal department. So they all are able to work more closely together because of the bot that they have created. And there are a lot of opportunities to do just that out there. I have only had a few chances here and there to kind of start to train and create my own bots, but the problem for me is I don't have a whole system of legal documents to sit on top of. So I don't have the data to train them on. But I do think that that is where this is going, is where everyone will have like an AI agent for litigation, or an AI agent for trust in the states, or for intellectual property, or for public defenders. Like, okay, here is your public defender bot. It knows just the information in your law firm for public defenders. So it is something that'll start you there. It's like, oh no, I need to actually go and work on transactional information. So you have transaction bot that sits on top of that. So it gets less confused and the hallucination rate is less high because of that. So there is a lot of value in that. But again, when the AI bot is turned on, the temptation to let it do all the work goes up. And I do not want to ever forget that we still need to get that but to get the human touch in there to make sure it is actually saying what we want to say, and that we are covering our bases to make sure nothing is missed or misquoted in there.
I was muted, sorry. Thank you so much for the reflection. Super interesting. Yeah, I see that agentic AI is coming more and more and will present new legal and ethical challenges for us. And
it is related to that too, that the privacy comes back into this, because you have to connect your calendar and maybe your phone and all these other tools to this agentic AI that now has to access, maybe if you use Google Workspace for your firm or for something else, now it has access to everything in there. So it's just another avenue for potential cybersecurity concerns as well as privacy. So it can make you more efficient, but you have to be aware of those guardrails that you have to put around it.
Great, thank you so much. As there is no question, I will take advantage and ask another question. Another thing that I would like to hear reflections on is most of the LLM models are trained in English. And I've read that for example, you put a prompt in Portuguese, it would be translated to English, and then it searches for a response, and then it's translated again. So if you have any thoughts or any concerns of the use of those LLM models that are mostly created and developed by the global north, and if they're used by Brazil, for example, if you see any risks that there is a global north perspective being brought through the LLM models, or if you have any reflections or of new power dynamics or even new colonial perspectives that could come through this.
There's absolutely that dynamic in here. The data that it's training off of is causing everything else to be skewed in some way, where if it does not know the nuance of the Portuguese, like what you were talking about earlier, where we'll get we'll misgender the information in deep L. The same thing can happen for if you upload something in Portuguese, it'll translate to English and try to translate it back. You could see how it's going to lose something literally lost in translation. There is definitely a lot of risk there. What I would hope for is that some of these tools are kind of open source-ish, where they are shared, where you can kind of get this information out there. And I would like to see more tools that are trained natively in different languages, because that is the way around this, is to make sure that people have more equitable, democratic access to these powerful tools without having go to the global north or where they were created. Now, sometimes that might require the companies to be a little bit more open than they are used to being. But I think that in the end, it would behoove them to do so, because it's going to draw more people to use these stores. Like, hey, we have created something that is in use in Brazil. Everyone else makes you go to the States or go to Europe to do something like this. There is the Chinese one, DeepSeek, that is out there that was initially, I believe it was in Mandarin, that was developed, but then there was a lot of questions about how they built things off of OpenAI, sometimes with IP concerns in there. So there's also, on top of that, the questions of just normal business concerns of like, what are we sharing that we shouldn't share, and what industry secrets are being exploited potentially when you're sharing this stuff. So it's a really complicated question and environment as things remain unregulated in many ways, but everyone is racing to try to tackle this. I don't know about all of you, but everything I see, if I see a commercial or an ad that has anything to do with technology, it features AI in it. Like, now use AI to do this. Now use AI to do that. And I think that is going to drive more people to maybe do those shortcuts and cut those corners when they definitely should not be doing it. But what you just laid out is exactly right, unfortunately, that this is something that I think has potential to cause more bias and flattening of stereotypes and cultures. Right before we started the presentation, I mentioned a study of a lot of different image generators, where if you ask it to create an image of an American, it is always a blonde white woman standing in front of an American flag. Now, America is not that always, but if you ask it for an Indian person, it's an old man with a beard, but no Indian flag anywhere. So they think that America is more patriotic in that sense. We're like, oh, it must be someone that's standing in front of an American flag, because it's drawing from the data that's trained off of. And if it's based in the States or based in Europe or based in China, that data is not as native or as important to someone that's working in Brazil or elsewhere. And this is absolutely something that I hope develops really quickly down the line.
Great, thank you so much for this. And I can share that I've used Notebook LLM, for example, and I put texts that I wrote in there, like papers, and I asked it to create the audio of it, the podcast version. And I've done it with papers I wrote in Portuguese and with papers I wrote in English. And I think the results for the ones that I wrote in English were much better than for the ones that were originally written in Portuguese. So that's a very interesting reflection. And yeah, as there are no questions, I would just pose a final question to you. And thinking about AI regulation broadly, if you had to choose one rule for a law that would be there, what would this rule be?
I think the rule would be about, one thing I didn't include in this presentation is in personalized, people become very attached to these. I would want to see more rules about signals for when people are using them in a way that could lead to self-harm or to some sort of other concerns with mental well-being, because there are a lot of problems with people. It kind of is combining with the loneliness epidemic that is happening in the States and worldwide. I would like to see more regulations about how teenagers or the elderly or those who are maybe more inclined to feeling alone or to self-harm are using these tools, because there are unfortunately instances where these tools became someone's best friend or confidant or therapist, and it did not catch red flags for when they were considering suicide or self-harm. And because of that, lives have already been lost because of these where these tools have not caught these issues. So I think there has to be a little bit more training in the algorithms for these tools that capture when someone is considering something that they should not consider. Now, that might be asking a lot because these tools, they're trying to make it, again, they want to please you. So when someone says, I love you so much, AI, I want to be with you forever, I wish I could just join you. That sounds like a red flag to someone that might be a therapist, but to an AI tool, it sounds like, oh, I wish you could join me right now. And that is a signal that that person may be unwell in some ways. And I think that those kind of regulatory guidelines would be extremely important here because, again, it's like parallel to a hallucination, or it is giving information that it shouldn't give or giving reassurance when it shouldn't give it. And so those are the kind of regulations I would like to see. Or I would like to see, just more specifically for law, I'd like to see more transparency in where you're getting your sources. Lexis and Westlaw do a good job with that, where if it's citing a source, you can click it and go into that environment and read that case. But ChatGPT, Claude, you have to really ask it and force it to give those citations to you. And even then it might not, because it just doesn't know. I would like to see, again, it's kind of a step forward with Notebook LM where it will show you in the sources you've uploaded where they have gotten that information. But a general large language model that's just drawing from the internet does not do that. And I would like to see more regulation about where'd you get this source and why, like just more transparency in that. But again, this might be a big ask because they would have to go back and say, well, this is generative AI, not extractive AI, where it's just drawing information from something. So, but again, if you're generating something, you still have to be standing on firm ground, and that ground is extremely wobbly sometimes. So those are the two regulations I would most like to see. Is there are more training need to be done about why this is becoming such a deep attachment for some people, just in their personal and professional lives, but also they have to know where you're getting this information from and that this may not be a real case.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this super important final reflections with us. I think it's inspiring, and it also pushes us to reflect more on the impacts of AI on our legal practice, but also like broadly at the Public Defender's Office, we deal with the most vulnerable populations in Brazil, and I think we need to be aware of all those risks and keep those reflections as we work on our practice. That's a practice of advocacy, but it's also a practice of human rights education, and even of AI literacy. It might be within our mission to push a little bit forward for AI literacy so that people know what they're using and reflect critically about the use of technology. So thank you very much. I don't have any more questions. I don't know if Dr. Diego was going to say some final remarks.
Well, I would like to once again express my gratitude to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for their partnership, to my colleague Luciana, and now my colleagues involved in the organization, and especially to Professor Kristopher Turner for this time and the excellent presentation. Thank you, and may you have a nice day.